Good women striving for virtue are highly underrepresented online. And because of this, men get really bad advice when it comes to dating and relationships and have a really distorted view of what women are looking for. You need to make this much money. You need to have slept with this many people and so on. I had Amber Rose on to talk about these things. We talk about how she gets constantly attacked by the Nick Fuentes Groyper crowd, why she was banned from TikTok, the miracle that ultimately led her back to her faith, and finally, what good women striving for virtue, striving for Christ, for God, are looking for in a man. Amber shared some insights that opened up my eyes and challenged me to be a better husband and father, and I hope that this conversation does the same for you. Please enjoy this conversation with Amber Rose.
Once the Groypers were banned, for the most part, it hasn't been too bad. So
The Groypers.
Yeah.
Like the Nick Fuentes
Yes.
crowd?
Yeah, they always go after me.
Do they really?
Yes, like it's just clockwork. And I had Franco Aurelius, he goes by Franco TV on Instagram, and he did a podcast episode with me, and now they're going after him because he was friends with some of them, and now they're just like, oh, L in the chat, like it's really funny.
So what do they attack you about?
I don't know. I think it's just because I'm a woman and just because like I'm online. I think the main thing that they dislike me for is my traditional Catholic values, but also just the fact that I'm like a traditional feminine woman online. And I post a lot of, I have a lot of women followers on Twitter. And so I like to post mass outfits for them to give them inspiration because they're always asking me for like, oh, like, what do you wear to mass? What's appropriate? So every Sunday I post a mass outfit, and I usually get right through the mud for those.
Really?
Yeah. I'm surprised you haven't seen it. It started like a year and a half ago. It's called the Mass Fit Discourse. I had articles written about me and stuff.
Really?
Yeah. Evie Magazine did an article about it, defending me, of course. But yeah, it was so bad.
So you have all these women online that basically, show themselves wearing next to nothing. And then you're out there trying to show people like how they can look good with, by being modest, and you're getting attacked for it.
Yeah, basically. And now it's an ongoing joke between my friends and I. Like, I'll be wearing something like this, and they're like, oh, your wrists are showing. You're so modest. It's just really funny.
Right,
now.
right. Yeah, they give you a hard time for it.
Yeah. But
what were the Nick Fuentes crowd and the Groypers like really coming after you about then?
I don't really know. They kind of latch onto people. I think part of it might have been because I did stuff with John Doyle. John Doyle and I are friends, and so I don't think they like him because Nick Fuentes and John Doyle kind of butt heads a lot. And so I've interviewed a lot of people that Nick Fuentes people don't like Trent Horn, friends with him. And so they just kind of find me through that, and then they just kind of are merciless. And also if you say anything against Nick Fuentes, they'll like destroy you.
Right.
But yeah, and so I would just like post something or whatever, and I would just have like a ton of like, I hope you get raped. Like, we're coming to rape you. We're going to bomb your house. Like, just like insane things. So of course you report it, and you're like, but after like 200 comments, you're like, okay, this is a lot. This is extensive. But yeah, I refuse to leave social media because I'm just like, y'all are just losers. So
yeah. Yeah, I did a post on TikTok that was kind of calling out Nick Fuentes because he went on this rant that said like how a man should treat their wife, and he basically tells men that like they shouldn't enjoy spending time with their wife. He said if you enjoy spending time with your wife, he said you're gay, right?
Yeah.
He was like it's gay to like to spend time with a woman or with your wife, and that that you should treat your wife like you treat your children is what he said. And I basically like it's like a 3-minute post on TikTok, and I think it's got almost like 3 million views. But basically I was like, I have this thing. It's like you don't take financial advice from broke people.
True. And
when it comes to Nick Fuentes, like this is a guy who's not married, has no kids, and it's like you're gonna tell us how to treat your wife.
I mean, not to mention that he also had that whole leaked video with Destiny where they did like, gay stuff. So.
I heard that, and a lot of people in the comments were like, "This is like Destiny's boyfriend."
Yeah,
or something like that.
It's like question mark. Yeah, exactly. And he's come out about a lot of things like "Your body, my choice" was his slogan and stuff and things. And so while I've never specifically spoken out against him directly, I've spoken out against things that he promotes, and like what you're saying, like the whole like toxic relationships and things like that, I've spoken out against and stuff, and they just latch on. They just find people and they just latch on to them, and then they just stalk them, which is really weird.
Yeah.
But I've also had Catholics drag us through the mud, specifically my husband, and it's just crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Dog eat dog world out there.
Well, is Nick Fuentes Catholic?
He's quote unquote traditional Catholic, but the bishops officially released a statement saying that they're not Catholic. Not like excommunicating him, but just saying like this is not a Catholic organization or group.
Okay.
So they specifically, the bishops came out and actually said that in an article, saying that the Groypers and Nick Fuentes are not like, they should not be associated with the Catholic Church in any way. But he says he's a traditional Catholic. He actually used to go to my church, which is a problem because if his people know that, which it's not, unheard of that I go to Canchas, like everybody knows that. It's not uncommon for them to like come and harass people and stuff like that. So, but we have ushers who are packing and stuff. So it's like, at your own risk, buddy.
Right,
and all the ushers are like besties with me. So if they see someone harassing me, they are just like, yoink. It's really funny, actually, to see.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, are you okay if we put that out there? Like, can we start with that?
Sure. If you want, I mean.
Might be interesting just to start. But well, Amber, anyway, thank you for joining me
Thank
today.
you. I'm so happy to be here. This is a lot of fun. I'm so excited.
Yeah, great. If you don't mind, can you, you touched on some things, but can you tell people who you are, introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Amber Rose. I'm known as the religious hippie. I started this ministry back in 2020 when I reverted back to the Catholic faith. I was a cradle Catholic. I was raised in the traditional Latin Mass, but I really didn't feel a calling to Catholicism when I was a kid. I didn't like it. So when I fell away for about 8 years, I realized that the world had nothing to offer me. So I came back into the faith, and that's like really summarizing it. But I came back into the faith, and as I was looking for people who were similar to me, this is during COVID, this is, I didn't find anybody who was like a young adult Catholic talking online. Usually it was not that I have anything. I love Catholic Answers and I love all those guys. I'm friends with them. But theology and apologetics and things like that, I wasn't really into that. And I was really looking for people who were my age, men or women, who could kind of guide me on this path of going back into Catholicism and what to do. I didn't know that there were so many situations on social media that divided Catholics. I didn't know about the stances on the Pope or this or that. I didn't know anything. And I was looking for someone to guide me. Didn't find anybody at that time. And so I kind of figured well, maybe I can become that for other people. And so that's the mindset I had, where I was like, well, maybe I can start sharing my story. And through sharing my story, other people will find me, and then we'll get a community going. And so that actually did end up happening on TikTok before I was permanently banned. Still salty about that. And
you're permanently banned from
TikTok?
TikTok?
Permanently banned on TikTok.
Why?
Because I broke some community guidelines for sharing animal pictures.
What?
Because we had chickens, and I have a snake, and we have a bunny and a dog and stuff. And I was posting I'm not killing them or anything. I'm not feeding my snake, but they were flagged as inappropriate. And keep in mind, I was doing a lot of political and religious content at the time that was a lot more crazy.
Ban potential.
Yeah, than the animals, but those were the ones that got banned. And I was like, what? Anyway, they banned me on my birthday in 2022. So, anyway, that was annoying.
Wow.
Yeah, the TikTok sucks. But now it's going to be banned potentially. Well, I know Trump kind of brought it back, but we'll see. We'll see where it goes. But yeah, so I wanted to become that for other people. And through that, I ended up finding a community, and I ended up building that a little bit more. And then people wanted more content. And as I was helping people in their journey, I was also learning my own information about the church and going through my own journey, because they would have questions for me what do you do with this? And what do you do with that? And I'm just let me go find out. And so that helped me grow in my faith until I got a little bit more experience in apologetics and reading the catechism more and stuff. And then it just kind of blew up into what it is today. I mean, God truly did just drop it on my lap, because I was like, if this isn't what you want me to do, this is a really hard prayer, by the way. It's God, if this is not for me, if this isn't what you want me to do, take it away. And instead, he kept opening the doors. I got interview after interview after interview. I got one with LifeSite a couple weeks in. I got a few others, and my following count just skyrocketed. And it was like overnight, basically everything became just super popular. And I was just like, all right. So I decided to do my best and to commit, and God's been opening the doors ever since.
Yeah. What platform did blew up first?
TikTok.
TikTok did.
And it's not hard to grow on TikTok, I'll be honest. But I was at about 100,000 followers before I was banned.
Okay.
And then from there, Instagram. And then from Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, or X, whatever.
So you have that's an interesting story of, being raised Catholic and then eventually falling away. I don't think that's necessarily uncommon for a lot of people who are cradle Catholics. I mean, I can say that, it wasn't necessarily dramatic for me where I, really fell away. I would say I more so fell away I want to say maybe like intellectually and spiritually. Like I was still going to mass. Like I still continued to go to mass on a weekly basis, but it was almost more like a going through the motions type of thing as opposed to like a, full all in type of, whole being belief. It wasn't until, really two things really changed for me. And it sounds similar to you in that I just realized that like the things of the world were just like, they constantly led to like emptiness, lack of fulfillment, whatever. So it's like, all right, well, let's go back and see, if all these things that I learned growing up and that I was being, taught and told like, hey, this is the truth. Like, why don't I take a look at this again? Right.
Yeah.
And that's when I started getting into more of the apologetics. And for me, it was like, apologetics in the form of, scientific evidence that points to God and the historicity of the Gospels and things like that, that I found really interesting that I just didn't know about. But then I started to kind of realize also just the power of like the sacraments and how they equip you for, as a defense almost against the things of this world that, really try to destroy you. So it's almost like it was like those types of things over time that really started to win me back. So kind of touch on that a little bit from your perspective and what happened to you.
Yeah, I think something I say a lot is that cradle Catholics have two conversions. They have the conversion at their baptism, but then they're raised in the faith. And honestly, most people, even good Catholics, are poorly catechized in some way or another, in some area. There's just so much information. But I think cradle Catholics specifically have two conversions: when they're baptized as a child, and then when they actually come into their faith on their own. Because this isn't just a tradition. This is something that's deeper than just, we go to mass on Sundays and that's it. And a lot of times those families that do have those traditions will opt for the Super Bowl over mass on a Sunday if it gets in the way. And so when they have two conversions, it's when they really make the faith their own. It's not just their parents' faith. It's now theirs.
Right. Their parents' faith or the faith of their family.
Right.
Yeah. It has to become a personal relationship on the individual level. Yeah.
Yes. And you can't convince yourself of God. It's a relationship. You have to build that relationship with him. It's not just, I can read all the theological books in the world and they'll prove that God exists. You could still deny him in here. And I think that's one of the biggest issues, is that a lot of people, they go through the motions, but they never have a conversion of heart. And, there's one thing of like having a dry season of prayer, a dark night of the soul even, that St. John of the Cross has talked about. But it's a whole other to just kind of be flippant, to be lukewarm, to not try, to not want to try. And I see that a lot. And so for me, when I first came back into my faith, I was very confused. So I went back to a Novus Ordo parish for a little bit, which is where I kind of grew up. And when I got there, it was a great community. I mean, there were so many people there that I truly loved, but it was very liberal in a lot of ways. And what I mean by that is we had these like youth retreats, and we would go to, we would have a room where we would all like figure out, okay, what do we want to do? Like, what do we want to go? And this one time they were like, we go and we meditate with this one monk. And I was just like, oh, cool. Like Franciscans, like Benedictine monks. Cool. I'm like, yeah, I want to go too. Why not? So we all pile in and we pull up to a Buddhist temple. And we all pile out, and I'm like, where am I? I'm like, what do I do? And I refused to participate. Everybody else was participating. All the other girls and boys who were in the youth group, and keep in mind, I was like 19 at this time, they were all participating. And I was just like, what are you guys doing? This is not, you can't do the faith thing. And then they got mad at me because I was being irreverent towards the Buddhist monk named Capricorn. I was just like, isn't that like a pepper or something? Whatever. They gave us a scarf. I burned it. It was great. It was a fun time. I mean, not in front of them, but I was like, that probably has some voodoo on it. I don't want that.
Yeah.
And so stuff like that would happen where I'm like, is this approved by the priest here? And it was. And he would come to our youth group and he would talk to all of us and we'd sit in a circle on these couches. And he was like, what do you guys want to change about the Catholic Church? And I'd be like, excuse me, sir. That's not at all what the Catholic Church is about.
Right.
And the first two things, can you guess what the first two things people said were? By chance?
Oh, guess what? If it's a group of 18, 19-year-olds, and what's the first thing that they would change?
Mostly women.
Mostly women. I would guess that women are allowed to be priests.
Yep.
Was that one of them?
Yep.
And then the second one.
This is going to be a little harder because it's very specific, but not in today's world. Like,
I don't know. What is it? What's the second
they
one?
wanted condoms passed out after Mass.
Contraception. Yeah, I should have known that. Abortion and contraception. Yeah.
And it's like, oh my gosh, I was mortified. I was like, are you guys serious? Passed out after Mass? You guys want contraception passed out after Mass? What is this? So that night, I was sitting on the couch literally next to one of my friends there, and I just typed in, I was like, traditional parishes near me. And I found my other childhood parish that we went to often, St. John Cantius, and I saw that they had a youth group. And so I was just like, okay, perfect. Like, I'm going to go there. So literally I said bye to everybody, never went back. And it sucked because I really did love some of the people there. Like but they were just, I was like, you guys can't seriously be this dumb. Like, you know that this is not compatible with the Catholic faith. But they went to Catholic school, and we kind of just already talked about how Catholic schools are not really Catholic schools. And so that was just so frustrating. But I went to my traditional Latin Mass parish, and I found my best friend, Chloe, and she's phenomenal. And the parish itself is just so beautiful. And that's actually where I met my husband as well. I mean, I was so confused coming back into my faith because I was like, okay, I didn't know there were two, opposites that people try to make it. I go to a very reverent Novus Ordo. I'm not trying to bash the Novus Ordo at all because I think it can be done very well, very reverently. But I do think that the guitar mass is a thing for a reason. Whenever you hear guitar mass, you don't think of the traditional Latin mass. And it's unfortunate. And we need to bring back the reverence. We need to bring back that beauty. But I didn't know about any of that at the time. I was like newly reverted. And so I struggled with my faith because it was weird because I felt like I was against everybody else. And yet I was like, but isn't this what the Catholic Church teaches? And yet the people who call themselves Catholic weren't Catholic. It was very confusing for me. And so it was almost kind of difficult. Like I had trust issues in a way because I felt like I couldn't trust what people were saying online, offline. Everybody had a different take. And I was like, what does the church teach? And that's what I based my ministry off of. I'm like, what is the church? Not my opinions, unless it's about something that's like irrelevant, whatever. What does the church teach? And how can I communicate that with joy to my people? And but lukewarmness and everything like that, I just was like, nope, I'm all in or I'm not. Like Catholicism is an all in thing. Either you're in it or you're not. And I decided I was like, I'm all in.
I think it's important that you say that because I think it's important for people to understand, especially for people that were raised in the Catholic faith. It's like, look, like you're not unique in, I guess you can say, doubting or questioning these things, right? And I think it's almost like you're going to have a period where you're gonna experience these things, right? But I think what you've pointed out that I think is powerful for a lot of people, a lot of young people that were raised in the faith. It's like okay, like yeah, this is gonna happen to you, but it's like the realization that no, like what the things that you have learned and the things that you were taught. I mean. Then again, you may have been misled. Like you mentioned, you have trust issues and that can be difficult. Like you even have, bishops within the church or, priests or pastors within the church that come out with maybe some political stance or maybe get into some type of trouble. And that can also causes a lot of people to have trust issues with the Catholic Church. But I think it's important for people to understand it's like at the core of it, we are talking about the truth. And just because one individual here or there, or even a group of individuals, mess something up, like that doesn't make what we're talking about. It doesn't, that's not the church itself. That
Right.
is an individual within the church. Like that's a sinner within the church.
Yeah. And I always tell people, I'm like, don't leave Jesus because of a Judas.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't. And, God said that there would be wolves in sheep's clothing. The church is not exempt from that. But I think there are a lot of people who are, quote unquote, black-pilled, where it's just like the Pope will say something or the Cardinal will say something or something comes out and people are like, oh my gosh. And then they spread the scandal everywhere.
Yeah.
And then it makes the Catholic Church look bad.
Right.
I'm like, you guys are literally fighting our leaders instead of praying for them. And at the end of the day, what they do doesn't really affect your salvation. 100 years ago, we didn't even know what the Pope did. This is the first Pope we've had who's really been in the social media public eye. I mean, JP2 definitely, Saint Benedict a little bit, or Pope, is he a saint? Pope Benedict?
He's not canonized. No.
Pope Benedict.
Pope Benedict, yeah.
I'm like, how many are there? But Pope Benedict, like, they were never in the public eye the same way that Pope Francis is. I think the most that they got was probably EWTN news coverage. And that was it. We didn't know what he had for breakfast. We didn't know when he went to a different country. Sometimes we did if it was a big deal. But it was usually after the fact because our news and media were not up to date at the time. And so for me, it's like, give the guy some grace. I mean, he's old. Being the Pope is not easy. And a lot of people are like, this and that, and Pope Francis said this and that. And I'm like, I'd like to see you do it any better.
True.
Honestly.
Yeah.
And look, is he my favorite Pope? No. Are we able to disagree with him? Of course, with respect for his office. But it doesn't make sense for the Pope to be perfect. But he's not perfect. He makes mistakes. And the only time he doesn't do that is if he's already preaching on doctrine that has already been established. Dogma, basically.
Right. Dogma by the church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when people
his stance on politics and stuff like that, like you don't, you can, I think it was you who posted this. Like you can, or maybe you reposted it. You can have respect for the Pope, but you don't have to agree with him on his personal opinions on, on politics or cultural issues. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, he's in like every headline. Anything he says gets blown out of proportion. And, I've talked with my friend Franco, and he's talked about how he thinks that there's enemies in the Vatican that are against Pope Francis because stuff has been leaked, certain things have been twisted. And that's not surprising, knowing the world we live in and knowing that, yes, of course, there can be people who are not holy in the Vatican. I mean, look at all the other popes we had. We had some popes that had kids out of wedlock. We had some popes that dug up another pope's corpse and put it on trial. I don't even want to get into that.
Right.
But it's crazy because I'm like, Pope Francis is actually pretty chill.
Yeah.
And they get all upset about the whole restrictions on the TLM and everything like that. And I'm a TLMer. And I'm telling people that it's like, yes, of course, like I'll advocate for the TLM, but obedience is more important. And it's not completely restricted. It's just down to the bishops and the cardinals, like if they decide to have it or not. I think in Texas it's banned in certain areas. But in Chicago, we still have it. And it's beautiful.
We still have it in certain areas around here. Yeah, that, to be honest with you, that calls me out a little bit because I can be a little critical of Pope Francis and his leadership. Sometimes I wish he was stronger from a leadership perspective and took more of like a hardline stance on what the church believes in, because like you said, especially the media in the United States will take things that Francis said and make it seem like it's church doctrine. And he almost makes statements that like leaves questions and leaves things a little bit obscure, where I was like, no, like this is a hard line stance of the church, like just stand for it. So I've been critical.
No, of course. I mean, I've done it too. I've talked with my husband with that before, where I'm like, he needs to be more specific. But that's the thing is like being able to disagree with him or be like, I wish he was more specific. Like that's not wrong. It's when people really drag him through the mud and just like insult after insult, no real, like they'll just latch onto it because certain YouTubers or something use it as clout or promotion, instead of like the benefit of the doubt and then being like, okay, he needs, but it's okay to disagree and it's okay to have some criticism towards him. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I actually, being totally honest, like I did a video yesterday that I ended up taking down off my channel because I was unhappy with what one of the bishops at the USCCB, the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops, came out and was on NBC and gave an interview basically attacking Trump and his immigration stance, and said that it was the official stance of the Catholic Church that what Trump is doing is basically against church teaching. And
is it?
I was unhappy with that because I don't think that's fair, because I think having strong borders and encouraging legal immigration, right?
Mm-hmm.
But not allowing not allowing open borders and just the open influx of illegal immigrants
Yeah.
into this country. I don't think the official stance of the Catholic Church is for a country to have open borders. I don't think
No.
that's not the official stance of the Catholic Church. But then also, what Trump is doing is deporting illegal immigrants in this country that have committed crimes. Like, that's what he's starting to do. And that's all of the deportations that you see are illegal immigrants who have committed crimes. And for someone who, like, my Catholic faith is very important to me, I don't think that the execution of that is something that goes against what the Catholic Church teaches. Like,
Yeah.
so I came out and was very critical of that. However, the impact that the video had, I was not happy with, because what it just generated was a bunch of people in the comments was like, this is why I left the Catholic Church. Like, this is why the Catholic Church is evil, et cetera. And I'm just like, all right. I'm like, this did not have the intent didn't have the outcome that I intended with this video. Like, I was using it to almost make a point, like you just mentioned. Like, there are different sides of groups within the Catholic Church, and I was just trying to be like a reasonable voice on one side of the issue by saying, like, hey, like, I don't think this is against the Catholic Church, just making an argument, making a point.
Mm-hmm.
But it had the consequence of it was not good, and it just resulted in people just absolutely, like, going off, I guess you can say, in the comments about the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate too, because I say that sex doesn't sell anymore. Negativity does. Because everybody just latches on to negativity. Yeah. And that's one of the things I've really tried to change about my ministry, is instead of latching on to, now that doesn't mean that I don't talk about hot button topics or I can't do that, but approaching it from not like, oh, give everyone the benefit of the doubt, because that annoys me when people don't pick a side. I'm like, pick a side. Mm-hmm. But from more of like a, hey, this is what's going on. This is what it could potentially be, whatever. But unfortunately, there are so many people out there that just take an inch and run. Like, they just run with it. And they'll say stuff like that. They'll say, like, this is why I left the church. This is why priests are pedos. This is why whatever. And it's like, you have really good points.
Pretty much sums up the entire comment section of that
video.
Yeah.
And it's like, you would have really great points that are really important and really important for Catholics to hear. And like, open borders is not okay. I mean, we see the damage that has caused. Housing rates have spiked. There has been government funding. People have died. I mean, it's not safe. And legal immigrants, yes, of course, like, if they actually do want to be here and want a better life, there are legal ways of going about that. It's a little bit more difficult. Yeah, but you can't just come here, steal jobs from hardworking Americans, steal housing from hardworking Americans, and then also taking hardworking Americans' lives. Like, that's not okay.
Right.
Does that mean every illegal immigrant is evil? Absolutely not.
Right.
But does it mean that they do need to get proper, legal stuff and they need to get a green card and everything?
The process correctly.
Yes. Then yes, of course.
Right.
Because it's just, it's wreaking havoc on our economy. It's wreaking havoc on our country.
Right.
But yeah, when we have disagreements with like popes or anything, it's like the negativity sucks in this one specific type of group. And that group is usually what I call pope bashers or just church bashers in general. And it can be so hard to prove a point, like what you were trying to do, without having them come in and be like, yeah, this is it.
Right.
Because it's like, that's not the point. At the end of the day, we don't jump over ship. We don't jump, over ship just because, the captain's a little bit, unsteady or whatever. We have to stay on, because if you jump overboard, you drown.
Right.
Like, what would you rather have? Like, stay on a ship and like support the captain and support the crew by praying and fasting and doing all that important stuff? Would you rather drown in the sea over there?
Yeah, right. Or, I mean, I like that metaphor. Or get your hands dirty and help
Yeah,
fix
scrub the
ship
deck.
or build it up. Yeah. 100%. All right. Well, what I want you to get into then, because I think, we talked about some of the issues and maybe some of the trust issues that people might have with the Catholic Church. But what I want to talk about, which I think would be really important for people to hear, is what ultimately like brought you back and then won you over. Like what ultimately like just cemented you, like, oh, this is the most important aspect of my life.
A miracle. Nothing short of a miracle. I was, like I said, born and raised Catholic. I fell away when I was about 11 years old, maybe 12. It's kind of shaky in there, but I was introduced to pornography around that time. And by a guy who was in, one of my peers, basically. I was homeschooled, but I did a lot of extracurricular activities. And so I was introduced to pornography. None of my friends, like close friends, were Catholic. Most of them were Protestant or whatever. And so I would want to stay over at night at their houses and have sleepovers without having to go to mass in the morning. And, just a bunch of stuff that I was being sucked into like the secular culture. I was in theater. I was in orchestra. I was in a bunch of different extracurricular activities with public school kids. And so I saw their life. Like they got phones, they had, social media, they were following Kim Kardashian, I don't know. And one of the girls had a caffeine addiction. She was my age and she had a caffeine addiction. She was like 12 or 13. And I remember just kind of being like, well, now I want a caffeine addiction. Like, what is this caffeine you talk about? And turns out I really hated coffee for a long time, but now I miss it because I can't have it. But anyways, and so I was really sucked into the secular feminist mindset. Yeah. I was never pro-choice, but I was very silent about my views on a lot of things. And then through the years, it's like I was in and out of really abusive, bad relationships. Because I was addicted to pornography at the time, I really struggled with body image issues. So I had an eating disorder. Self-harm was a huge part of it. I was anxious. I was depressed. And I was getting bullied a lot in my homeschool group that I was a part of. So I was physically stabbed in the back with a fork, actually. That was really painful. She did not like me very much. She thought I was stealing her boyfriend, but it was a mess. It was a mess. And I was a part of that group, and that group I only saw once a month. And so rumors would spread about me, and then I'd go into the group, and then it'd be like, and then I'd leave, and then more rumors would spread. So it was a really toxic environment because I really tried to have community, but I just didn't fit in with the theater kids, didn't fit in with the orchestra kids, didn't fit in with the Catholic kids, which were the homeschool group kids. Well, not all of them were Catholic, I guess. And there were 2 homeschool groups, but I didn't fit in anywhere. And so I learned to basically mold my personality to fit everybody. So with the theater group, I was more annoying. Just saying. Theater kids. With the orchestra group, I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I love like Bach and Beethoven. I did not like Bach or Beethoven. I'm like, what? I do now, but I didn't then. And then with the homeschool groups, it would be like, oh yeah, like Ouija boards and stuff, like totally. And yeah, sex outside of marriage, sure. Drugs, yeah, whatever. Like I never did that stuff, but I was always just kind of like, yeah, whatever. Like, who cares? Like, you do you, relativism. And
you're trying to be cool in each one of the groups.
Yeah. And I mean, that took a toll on me because then I felt like I wasn't anybody. I was just a mask after a mask.
Yep.
And then on top of that, the only attention I really got were from guys because of how I looked. And because I was really skinny, I had really long hair, and I don't really know. But I guess I was like one of the only girls that like had a fun personality because I had braces, so I wasn't like attractive. But the guys really liked me because I could be one of them. Like I could play Frisbee with them. I could play baseball. We went for hikes. I could be one of the guys, so to speak, which I'm totally against now. I'm like, do not treat me like a man. No. But at the time, the guys were less drama and the girls were bullying me. So I was like, whatever. And then, so anyways, this went on for years. I was in and out of a relationship with someone who was not Catholic. And when I came back into my faith, he was really confused because he was just like, weren't you just bashing the Catholic Church like a week ago? And I was just like, yeah, but things change. It's fine. And it was hard because when I was coming back into my faith, I hit rock bottom. I was depressed. I was anxious, eating disorder problems. I mean, I was not eating at all. So that didn't help the anxiety or the depression. And then on top of that, the self-harm, all of that just kind of compiled with the bullying and the cyberbullying. People would actually make social media profiles of me to like bully me. And so I basically just was in my bed for days. I was just like, I'm not leaving. I'm not going anywhere. I'm like 19 at this point. And this has been going on for about 8 years. And I've tried everything from relationships to, friendships to, I was addicted to sexting for a while and things like that to fill the hole in my heart that I was missing. And I never would have guessed that God was the shape of the hole, basically. And so I rolled over in bed and I looked at my calendar on the wall and it said it was Sunday. And I was like, Sunday, okay, I have like tests and I have stuff due because I was in online college at the time. And then I kind of like rolled on my back and I was just like, wait a second, Sunday, what we used to do on Sundays? And I was like, we used to go to mass on Sundays as a family and we go out to eat afterwards. And so I decided, okay, you know what? I think I'm going to try and do that. Like, I don't know what motivated me to get up, but I found the least scandalous outfit I had and I put that on, drove myself to mass. I sat in the back and I was kind of sandwiched in with people. And so I was just like trying to control my anxiety because I was just like, oh my gosh, everybody here knows I don't belong. I'm a sinner. I don't think I can do this, you know? And obviously that's Satan trying to get you to leave because if he sees you trying to regain relationship with Christ, he's losing his grip on you. And so he doesn't want that. So he'll do everything he can to kind of get you to leave. But the issue was I was sandwiched. So I couldn't get out. So I was like, okay, when everyone goes up for communion, I'm going to dip. And so I'm just like sitting there bouncing my foot, waiting for it to happen. And consecration happens and the bells ring. And I'm not really paying attention, like we're kneeling, but I'm not like in it. And then everything freezes. And I look up and the priest is doing the consecration, transubstantiation. And I look at the host and I feel Jesus speak into my heart. He's like, do you trust me? And I was like, God, I was like, hello. Because you never have anything you don't have an experience like that before. It's like, you think you're crazy, honestly. And he just kept asking, like, do you trust me? Do you trust me? And I said, no, like I've gone through so much. And I was rattling off everything. And I was telling him I was so mad. And in my heart, I wasn't mad at him. I was mad at the situations. But I was still like trust issues and problems and this and that. And I was just like, no. But he kept asking, do you trust me, over and over and over again? And it was like he was chiseling away the stone cold parts of my heart with just like a little chisel and a pick. And eventually, whether I got fed up or he cracked through, one of the two, I'm sure both, I said, I can try. And that's all he needed, honestly, to start making changes in my life. And at the time, I had no idea about Divine Mercy because, I mean, I knew about the chaplet and stuff, but I mean, I was so little. And so when I learned about Divine Mercy is now a huge part of my ministry. I had my first talk on Divine Mercy Sunday. I got engaged on Divine Mercy Sunday. And so Divine Mercy has been a huge part of my life and realizing that, like, yes, I went through all those things, but I do deserve mercy. And, you know, I think the greater the sinner, the more, you know, they basically have access to God's mercy is what Jesus said to St. Faustina. So yeah, that was a lot.
Yeah, wow. I mean, that's really good. I mean, a couple things came to my mind as you were talking. It's almost like that grace that came into your life when you were in your bed and you couldn't get out of it. I mean, that was obviously God at work trying to get you back to him, back to mass, and then you had that experience. But what's interesting about that experience is that it was you know that it's real because it was so like honest. Like God's like, do you trust me? And you're like, the initial answer to that was no. And I mean, I think that's really important because there are times in your life, you mentioned earlier, like a dark night of the soul, or even times where like you're in darkness and you doubt and you're like, it's like one of the most powerful prayers you can make is like, my faith is weak. I don't trust you. Like help me. You know what I mean?
Literally.
Like, and that's where I feel like some of the most powerful, like that's in those times, some of the most powerful graces can really come. So that's a great story.
Thank you.
Divine Mercy. It's hard so like me as a man, if I'm being honest with you, like the aspect of Divine Mercy, it's like, I don't know, like I like Christ as like the warrior, like the guy who sacrificed his life, like the masculine version, right? To be honest with you, like the you know, when people are like, you know, trust in Christ's divine mercy, or like, you know, the precious blood of Christ. Like for me, it's like it feels very feminine, I guess you can say.
Yeah.
So I guess I can say I haven't necessarily been won over from a divine mercy perspective. But it's interesting to hear you say that, and where my mind goes with that is you have a world, especially in the online space where you have all these people talking about how, men want women who are virgins, and like you have, basically this space. It's like how feminism has led women astray, and you talk about body count, and you even have people within the Catholic space that are like, no, it's not helpful for women who have had, a sinful past to be out there talking about it, right? Like you
Yeah.
see that a lot. But I think people need to know about divine mercy. Like, I would make the argument that like you would want younger women who are maybe struggling, because we all struggle with
Yeah.
sin. Nobody's perfect. So to expect women to just be perfect all of their lives, like, and to never make mistakes, like men aren't held to that standard, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's okay if a man makes a mistake and, moves on. It's like, it's acceptable. But it seems like women they have this expectation that they need to be pure, they need to be perfect, right? And, any woman that has had, a sinful past or a past that they've had to overcome, it's like, no, we don't want to hear that. Like, and it's like, well, then who are we going to hear from? We're not going to hear from anybody.
Yeah, I actually dated a guy once, and I told him about my past with like sexting and pornography, and he's like, well, I guess you're somewhat pure. And I was like, excuse me? Like, I went to confession, sweetie, and I've never actually done anything, So guys like that, it's interesting because they don't hold themselves to the same standard like you were saying. Like, it's more of like, oh, I can do whatever I want to do. But as a woman, you have to be exactly what I want you to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very controlling. It's very manipulative. And I don't know exactly where it comes from. Maybe you do. But I mean, in a way, I feel like I want to say it's because of the feminist movement, women have really taken over a lot of men's roles and kind of become like a surrogate man, which is really stupid. But they've kind of stepped into that more. And so the men feel like they're out of a job. And so in some ways they're trying to put women in their place, but not doing it properly. Like, it's more insulting than it's actually helpful. And I think the feminist movement sucks. I mean, it's awful. I don't think there was really ever a time that the feminist movement was fine. I mean, people like, oh, well, what about first wave feminism? And I'm like, I don't really think it was all that great. People are like, oh, but women can vote. And I'm like, yeah, but now we have all this individual voting and this voting system where it's like it used to be if you had land and you were the man of the home, you voted for everybody. That just made things so much more simpler, in my opinion. But, and not that it has to do with like suffragette movements or whatever, but my thing is more like feminism has taken off so far and we have no real masculine figures that men can actually meet and learn from. It's all online. And not that that's bad, but they kind of get this false sense of masculinity where it's like control, power, I have to be bigger than everyone else. I can't have emotions, like all this stuff. And that's not real masculinity. If you want to learn about real masculinity, look in the Bible at St. Joseph. I mean, there's not one word uttered by him in the Bible, and yet he was the protector, the provider, and the most caring and probably kindest man. I mean, he raised Jesus. I mean, that's crazy. And so I think there's a pandemic or an epidemic maybe, of a lack of masculinity, true masculinity at least. And these men are not sure. They want to be masculine, but they don't really have the people to show them how in person. They don't have, maybe they don't have a father figure. Maybe their father's not strong in masculinity either. Maybe, they're stuck in the bro dude phase, as I call it, where they're just kind of stuck in the boy mindset where it's like, oh, girls can be treated just like guys. And it's like, hey man, what's up? And like competition. And I know guys take a while to mature as opposed to women, but at the same time, I do feel like some men at least are really trying, but they just do not have the resources to show them what it takes to really be a man, the sacrifice, the dedication, the loyalty. And I think, unfortunately, so many just, they have a mask on because they don't know how to actually embody masculinity. And it's very sad to see because I see a lot of great guys who just are wearing a mask as opposed to being themselves. But that, I mean, there's a whole other rabbit hole down. You could go a bunch of different directions with that. So,
I mean, do you think that a lot of the stuff that we get in, especially from the online culture, how to be a man, what it means to be a man, but also too, like what a man should look for in a woman. I mean, what a man should look for in a woman. has left a lot of young men almost like blackpilled on relationships and marriage and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, not to mention that the media has been basically anti-man for years. I mean, look at the father figures on any sitcom. They're idiots.
Yeah, bumbling idiots.
Yes,
that
they
the
can't do
wife
anything.
controls and
And the kids don't respect him.
Right.
And it's insane. And I'm like, no. But people grow up watching that. And a lot of guys that I knew grew up watching Disney Channel act a lot like a Disney Channel character. And I'm not saying that, you know, just because you watch Disney, you're going to become effeminate or whatever. But it's interesting how the media we consume becomes us, right? Like you are what you eat, you are what you consume in general. So any media you're consuming is in some ways rewiring your brain. And that's why pornography is so dangerous. And so for me, when I'm very careful about the media I consume. I don't want to consume media that is very feminist and very like anti-man. And it's really hard to find stuff like that these days. And yeah, I mean, trying to find relationships and stuff, not to mention that a lot of guys stay in the same circle. And it kind of becomes, this has happened multiple times to people I know where they stay in a close circle of guys, but they never branch out to meet new people of different ages, different backgrounds, different, you know, experiences. They kind of stay stuck in this toxic cycle of like, what'd you do today, bro? Oh, you know, I had rocks for breakfast. Like, it was so cool. He's like, yeah, well, I bathed in ice, like, you know, and it just seems like a constant like toxic cycle in this group as opposed to them learning from each other, maturing. And I think guys can have fun. You know, that's not the point. I don't think guys have to be stoic and serious 24/7. But there is an immaturity that I've seen in guy groups where they don't push themselves to be better. It's kind of just feels like bullying, to be honest. And then when a guy goes out on a date with a girl, they're like, oh, like, what'd you guys do? And like he gets bullied for it, or they try to figure out even in Catholic circles, did you get to second base? Whatever second base is. I don't know the bases. I'm too into
how
stuff
far
for
did
that.
you go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a guy thing, you know, that's kind of infiltrated from society. And it's like Catholic guys shouldn't be like that. And, you know, respecting a woman and stuff like that, I think guys are afraid of at times because of the feminist movement. It's like, should I hold the door open for her? Should I not? Should I get her flowers? Is that too much? And my thing is just like, just be yourself. You know, the right woman will respect you and will let you lead without you having to force her, right? If you already have the confidence, if you already have the leadership, you won't have to force the right woman to follow your leadership, you know? And marriage is, you know, a ship in a lot of ways. It's like you need your co-captain. And if you can't trust your co-captain and she can't trust you to lead, then everything falls apart. You guys, you know, I don't know, breach or whatever on a rock, whatever. I don't know shipping metaphors. But
we already used one of the shipping metaphors.
Oh, yeah.
No, but I think it's important that you said, but I also think it's important for especially men to know is that you do have the responsibility to build yourself up into someone that deserves the respect of a woman. And I think that's where in like, especially in the online space, especially like in the red pill community, someone like an Andrew Tate, those types of guys, like that's where a part of their message is positive, because we do have that responsibility to build ourselves up. And, you know, I like to use the term, you know, you build yourself up into the man that God made you to be. And that is into a man who is capable of, I mean, I use the term leading and serving are really the same thing when it comes to being in a marriage and being in a family. But to be someone who is capable of leading and providing for a wife and a family, like there are certain, you know, practical things that you need to do, you know, and I think that, you know, you have to be able to, I mean, if it's, in my opinion, you should be taking care of your health. You should be taking care of your body, which is a temple that God gave you, right? Like you should be working to get in shape. You should be committing yourself to something professionally, then gaining competence in something that can contribute to the community, but also allows you to provide for your family, right? And I think that aspect of, you know, kind of the worldly things that maybe some of the red pill guys touch on, I think is positive. And I don't think the church necessarily touches on those things enough, but I think those are important requirements, or you could even say prerequisites for a man to get a woman that is going to follow him, right? You have to be someone worth,
Yes.
I say worth following, but I think you kind of do.
Yeah.
I think that is a responsibility of a man in this world.
And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of guys are up for that challenge. It just seems like they want to take the easy way out where they're willing to just become the bumbling idiot and let their wife do everything like they do in the sitcoms because it's easier. And that's true. It is easier, but it's less fulfilling. It leads to unhappy marriages. I mean, the men do need... first of all, women need to uphold standards because if women uphold standards, men will have to race to meet those standards. And too many women often just throw themselves at any guy whenever and not set boundaries, not set standards. And if he doesn't have set standards to meet, he's probably going to stay where he is. He needs the motivation. Now, we can argue that the motivation should be for yourself to get better and to be worthy of dating someone someday if you're single. Yes, of course. But if you are... if you really love somebody, if you're dating somebody and you really love them and they're worried about your health or they're worried about this, they're setting a standard for you. And you should be able to rise to the occasion and meet that standard and be able to do something about it, especially as a guy.
The motivation that a woman can provide a man, like you said, by holding them to standards or having an expectation, it's like the world was built by men trying to impress a woman, right? And I think that biological motivation is very important. It's like, I can be. Pearl Davis asked me this. She was like, "So are you're not able to have motivation and like build your business and stuff on your own?" I was like, "No, I know how to be competent. I could probably do that, even if it was by myself. But the fact that I have like a wife and a family, that amplifies. It makes me better. It makes everything that I do more meaningful." And it makes me want to, I say achieve an even higher level because I want to do it for them. Like it enhances and amplifies your life. But I think what's important, I think, for people to understand is that having those standards and expectations from a woman is not something that is a negative thing. It's a very positive thing. And it's something that, here's what I'll say. If you as a woman, you want to stay home, right? You want to stay home. You don't want to work, right? You want to stay home. You want to take care of a family.
Yep.
You have to be intentional about finding a man that can allow that to happen, right? So that means you have to find a man who is competent and capable and can provide for you in order to do that. Like I say that making that decision, like I talk about entrepreneurship. I'm a small business owner, so it's something I'm passionate about. But for a woman to decide to stay home, like to me, that's an entrepreneurial decision, and people don't look at it that way, but I think it is, and it requires you having certain things that you're looking for when it comes to a man. And if he's not someone that can provide or be competent or whatever, then that's probably not someone you should necessarily get married to. So like you said, it's like having those standards as a woman is very important, but you as a man need to understand that if you want a woman who you can provide for, who's at home taking care of your kids, like if you want that kingdom that you get to lead, then you kind of need a woman that has those standards, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting to think about it.
No, it's so true. And I think it's really important because at the end of the day, it's like you both have to have a business savvy kind of mindset, especially when she's dealing with kids and schools and this and that, or homeschooling and whatever, and you're dealing outside the house. It's like you have to be able to trust your spouse to do things when you're not around. And one of the reasons I married the man that I did is because I have this, it's kind of morbid, but I have this thing where I'm just like, if I were to die and we had kids, would I trust him to be able to care for the family if I died? And the answer is yes, with the man I married. All the other guys that I dated, no. Not once. I'd be like, my kids would be like dead within a week. Or it would be like maybe, but that's the thing is it's like you need to be able to trust your spouse. And if you don't have that trust while you're dating, it's not going to happen in marriage. I think that's what a lot of people get wrong. They're like, oh, well, once we get married, the addiction will go away. Oh, once we get married, no, marriage magnifies the problems you already have. So many people get married when they already have red flags in the relationship. And then they get married and then they get magnified and then it gets worse. And it's just like the red flags were there. And but they have a duty as a married couple now, especially if you're married in the church, because that cannot be dissolved unless it's, invalid for some reason, that they have to figure it out. They have to make it work. They have to work together as a team. Marriage is not easy, but it's so fulfilling and it's so beautiful. It's meant to lead us to sainthood. And, you should marry someone who is going to cultivate sainthood for you in your life and lead you towards Christ, both. I mean, I know it's primarily it's the man's job to do that, of course, but the wife also has a duty to, if the man is falling short, to pull him back and be like, hey, we have to go to church. We have to do these things. We need to pray together. And obviously that's not the woman's duty, but men have rough days too, and so being able to have that communication and also just that partnership and being able to talk to each other is really important. Not a lot of couples have community or, communication or community, I guess.
Or community. Yeah. Both.
Yeah.
Both.
They're missing both.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I make the argument that like being a solo nuclear family or being a nuclear family without like community is very difficult. I think it's good for men and women. It's good for marriages to have like-minded families and other spouses around you that are shooting for the same target, which would be God and heaven and sainthood. That, there are things that obviously the communication between a husband and wife is extremely important, but there are, aspects of conversation that me as a man, like I can't offer my wife. So it's good for her to have, like-minded friends that she can go and, maybe chat with and stuff like that. And there's good for things that me as a man can go and talk to guys, again, who are properly aligned and valued that, my wife maybe can't provide for me. Like and I think that that's really important. I think that's important for people to understand. It's like being a isolated nuclear family or marriage is not easy. It's hard because you don't have that community aspect, right? So it's interesting, and I want to get into this a little bit, but you mentioned that these kind of red flags that people take into marriage, like marriage is going to solve all my problems, having kids is going to solve all my problems, it's going to cause them to disappear. The stats on OnlyFans use is pretty crazy. So they release stats, and I can put the source for this in the notes of this video, but 90% of users on OnlyFans, 90% are married men. Married men.
That hurts.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah, but I think what's interesting about that is like obviously porn addiction is something that, I mean, a lot of people struggle with, which the stats on it are just like shocking to me. But like when it comes down to it, I think the trailing 40-year divorce rate. So, and this was a stat as of, I think, 2021. So from, call it 1980 to 2020, the trailing 40-year divorce rate was almost 70%. And actually the divorce rate is actually falling, but yeah, you think that's good.
People aren't getting married.
That's because people are not getting married.
Ugh, I knew there was a caveat.
So I guess from your perspective, what are people doing wrong? What are young people doing wrong before they get married, and what can we do? What can we do better?
Where do I start? Let me see. I think one of the main things where people go wrong is cohabitation. That is one of the number one leaders to divorce. People have to try it out before they know if they're compatible or not. That's not the point of marriage. It's not if you guys can be compatible sleeping together or if you guys can be compatible in the same house, you guys work through that. But people who sleep together or in general move in together will commit to buying a car together, buying a house together, even having a child together. But they won't do the number one commitment that makes it all, foundational. They're doing it out of order. And what ends up happening? Okay, well, you get that car and you get the house and everything, but then the woman is sometimes bitter because she's just like, well, where's the ring? Where's the ring? Where's the ring? But the man's already getting everything he wants. Why should he marry her if he's already getting sex, if he's already getting the car and he's already got the house? Why does he have to go through this elaborate, expensive occasion when he's already getting everything? And she's just like, where's my ring? Where's my ring? So this then turns into the forever boyfriend, forever girlfriend, where they're then dating for over 5 years or more or whatever. And, then the women gets into their 30s and they want to have kids and they want all this stuff. And then they find out he's never going to commit. So they're like, all right, I'm going to go find someone else. But then it creates this cycle of, women being older, getting married and being unfulfilled in the forever boyfriend, forever girlfriend relationships. And part of that does also have to do with the guys, right? Because the men, like we talked about, need to rise to a standard. But if the woman is allowing herself to just be kind of like strung along and not setting those standards or stepping up for herself and being like, no, I know what I deserve and this isn't it, and getting out of a relationship before it's too late is really important. But that is the number one thing that I have an issue with is people cohabitating, becoming forever and forever boyfriend and girlfriends, and basically women giving the man everything, all the marriage material before the commitment of marriage. That's a problem. Huge problem.
Yeah, it's almost like the woman surrenders what she has that's most valuable, gives it all up, and then the man has no incentive to. I mean, honestly, and this is where again the red pill will come in and be like, take the risk, right? Because the man takes then financial risk, and he's got to lose half of his assets, for example, and
the no fault divorce issue.
Yeah,
and I think really that comes down to you. My thing is that for me, and I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this, divorce is a very selfish thing, especially in a lot of cases. Because unless, of course, it's like cases of like abuse and things like that's, I'm not counting cases of abuse. And if you're in the Catholic Church, obviously there's rules about all of that. But I'm talking about the people who are like, we're just so different now. We don't really agree anymore and da-da-da-da-da. No, you have a responsibility to go to marriage counseling, to make it work, especially if you have kids. I mean, your kids should be your top priority. I think it's selfish when parents are like, oh, we just don't get along anymore. And then little Timmy no longer has a dad and a mom together. That destroys a child's psyche. That destroys the child and everything he knows. I can't tell you how damaging that is to a child's foundation, especially when they're that young or even when they're older. It doesn't matter. It's like you guys have a duty. And unfortunately, with no-fault divorce and everything, it's true. Women can leave a man for any reason. But I'm like, why would you marry someone who you'd be afraid of leaving you? Why are you marrying someone you can't completely trust? And it's just like, oh, well, maybe they just turn overnight or whatever. I'm like, well, if you have that fear, why are you getting married at all? Like, why are you even dating if you have that fear? And it really does come down to like a selfish desire of wanting to have marriage, but without the real commitment. And I hate that. It's awful.
Yeah, when I was debating Pearl Davis on this issue on marriage, a lot of the people, in the comments, they were like, "This guy lives in a bubble," like because I'm here defending marriage and talking about how much meaning and fulfillment it can bring to people's lives, which then makes me a simp. Apparently, someone who is standing for marriage and believes in its value that's the red pill word for simp. Apparently, but as I was thinking about it after, I was reflecting on the fact, and it was just like, no, you know what? Yeah, I do live in a bubble, because one of the comments that I made is like, I don't care about divorce. Like divorce isn't a thing for me, and I don't care what the state incentivizes when it comes to marriage, or I don't care about what assets my wife can take from me if she decides to divorce me. It's like, and I've been like, I'll give you, I think I thought about saying this to Pearl, but I didn't. I was like, here's what I'll say. I'll give you $1 million if my wife leaves me, if she divorces me. But I don't know, like like when it comes to my wife and I, we met when we were 15 years old. We know everything about each other. We have a trust and a foundation that has been, that has been established since we were young. We got married young. We've kind of grown up together. And I don't know. And when it comes down to it, here's what it comes down to. We were married in the church, but we are oriented. Our lives are completely oriented with God at the top of our priority hierarchy. And when it comes down to it, we'd rather die than break our promise to God and each other.
Exactly.
And when you have sainthood and that level of giving up your life, I guess you can say, at the top, then there's not really anything of this world that is really that difficult to get over, right? Yeah. People change. It's like, I'm not the same person that I was when I was 15 years old. Like I was a different person when I was 15. I was a different person when I was 21. I was a different person when I was 27, 33. And now, I just turned 36. I'm different. I'm a different person than I've been throughout all that time. And yet here we are still married. But what I can say is that our relationship is way better, way deeper, way more meaningful than it ever was when we were 15 years old. Like the things that we cared about like are very shallow that we cared about when we were 15 than the things that we care about now. Like we've got 5 kids together. Our life is harder. We have more stress, I guess you can say, but we also have a better and deeper relationship.
Yeah.
So it's like, to get back to that point, it's like, you know what? It's like, I do live in a bubble. And what I say, it's a God-led bubble that keeps us doing the inputs and having the conversations and remaining in truth on a daily basis for our marriage to be successful. And can I stop doing those things and that gets our marriage off track? Yeah, I have the opportunity to do that. And so does my wife.
Right.
But when it comes down to it, is that this bubble or this protection is really just like the rubric or the story, like Christ as the logos, which is what that means, that we remain in every day. And that keeps us safe from all of these things that attack individuals and marriages in our culture.
Yeah, 100%. And without the faith, there is no real marriage. That's the thing. People get married outside the church. That's not a real marriage.
Yeah.
I mean, it's married by the state, sure, but it's not real because a real marriage is between you and God and your spouse.
Yep.
It's not you, God, and the state, or you and your spouse and the state. It's you, God, and your spouse. And there's witnesses at the church, and that is soul binding. You are bound together until death. Till death do us part. You know, words used to have meaning, and now they're just kind of thrown around. They're just kind of like, oh, do you promise to love each other in sickness and in health? How many people do I know that things got hard, sickness, and they left? How many people do we know who, you know, they, till death do us part, they just were like, no, I'm not really feeling it anymore. I'm going to go with Ted from The Office, actually. He's cooler than you, Phil. Names. Ted and Phil.
Ted and Phil's out there. Don't get any ideas.
Exactly. Yes. But, you know, words used to mean something. A promise used to mean something. A covenant used to mean something. And the further we drift away from God in our society, the further we drift away from our true meaning and the meaning of marriage, the meaning of the sacraments, language even has been shifted. And love is no longer what love used to mean. Love means to will the good of another. But you hear love and people are like, oh, love is love, or I love my tree. I'm like, you can't, that's not how love really works. You can like something, but love is different. And to water down words and to water down commitments is just a huge problem today. And I see it everywhere. It's awful.
Yeah. I was talking with a group of guys about this. So have you heard of Exodus 90? We're doing Exodus 90 right now. And this is, I think, the 3rd time I've done it. And we really, you know, enjoy is an interesting word to use when it comes to Exodus 90. But one of the important themes of it is, like, you can practice all these disciplines. You can, you know, all these dietary restrictions and cold showers, and you can do all these disciplines. But if they're not aimed and oriented at bettering your relationship with God, if they're not done for God, then what good are they really doing you? And I think and the point that I want to make is, you use the word covenant. And I think that word's so important is because, like, look, your marriage is an agreement between you and your spouse and God. And when you take God out of it, it just becomes another relationship that you can break up. Like, you can divorce and you can just dissolve on your own when it's just a human to human thing. But when it's oriented at God, like, I mean, both you get there's some magic as far as the grace goes, as far as that works, right? Like, you actually become someone different that maybe even makes you more capable of keeping a marriage intact, of allowing you to do the things that actually are required in order for that marriage to stay together, right? Like, you're praying, you're dedicating yourself to, you know, I have the crucifix right behind me in every video, and in, you know, not even every video, like in every room in my life, because it's a constant reminder that, no, that's what love is. Like, the self-sacrifice and the choosing on a daily basis to maybe do things for my wife and kids that are inconvenient for myself or are maybe things that I don't want to do.
Yeah.
Right? It's the giving up your life. Like you said, you love a tree. It's like, well, are you willing to give up your life
For a
for a
tree?
tree? It's like probably not. So you probably don't really love that tree. But when it comes down to it, and like giving up your life means more than just dying for that person. It means actually like the moment to moment. And this is really hard. I'm saying this, but I don't even like,
It's hard.
I do it enough for my marriage to be successful, obviously, right? So it's not like I'm sitting here, somebody who doesn't have a track record of proof. My wife and I have been married for 12 years.
Oh, wow.
And
God
we have a
bless you
good
guys.
relationship, right? But like, so obviously I've done things throughout our marriage that have allowed, and so has she, that have allowed our marriage to be successful. But again, it's a daily commitment to actually doing and executing on those things that is love. Like love is not just a feeling that you have. No, it's an actual action that you have to perform every single day.
Yeah, and I mean the most accurate view of love we can have is Jesus on the cross.
Right.
I mean, laying your life down for another, like you were saying, but also just self-sacrifice. I mean, being able to give up something we really want for the good of another. All that stuff is really important. And I feel like these days we've become so selfish, so wrapped up in what I need. What do I need? What do I want? What do I, get out of this? And marriage isn't about what you get out of it. It's about what you put into it. And if you're only putting in, selfishness and stuff, that's going to breed resentment. There's going to be a lot of problems in your marriage. But being able to deny yourself and go the extra mile for another person. And for guys, I feel like they're kind of, I could be wrong about this, but at least in my experiences with, boyfriends and stuff, my husband doesn't have this problem because he's a man. And I feel like, he's really great at this. But for some guys, they'll see something like, let's say the dishes need to be done. And they'll just be like, oh, my wife will get that, And the man is responsible for the housework. He is the head of the house. Everything falls beneath him. His wife is a helper. So if something doesn't get done, it's actually kind of on the man to get it done necessarily. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case all the time. The wife obviously has a responsibility to the house and make sure things run smoothly and to be helpful, but the man also has that responsibility. And it's not just mowing the lawn or changing a light bulb. If he sees that the dishes need to be done, act like a single parent. That's something I say. Act like a single parent. Like, if you don't do it, it's not going to get done. And that's not with everything. If you don't have time for something, obviously don't bother. But when both couples do this, not just one, because that could breed resentment, but when both couples are like, oh, if I don't do this, it's not going to get done for things they have time for, the other person's like, oh, the laundry's done. Oh, okay. My husband and I do this all the time. He'll start a load of laundry. I'll switch them, and then he'll take them to the room. I'll fold them. And then, in between our days and work days and whatever we're doing, and we get like so much done that way. Like he'll do it's not, oh, it's your turn to do the dishes. It's not a competition. It's not like, oh, I did the dishes yesterday, or, oh, I already did that. It's like, I don't want to do that again. It's just like, oh, what would be helpful for you right now? What can I do for you right now? Because I have some time. Oh, would you mind just quickly loading the dishwasher? And I don't expect perfection, because I think that's a woman's problem, where they're just like, oh, my husband tries to help, but he doesn't do it the right way. I'm just like, get over yourself. Cut him some slack, okay? If there's a specific way you'd like it to be done, if it's that big of a deal, I don't think it's that big of a deal. But if there's a specific way, just be like, hey, honey, next time, would you mind if, we could do a little more like this, or whatever? Because whatever. But like, I do believe that when you work in that way, you're a team. It's not just one person's responsibility or another. It's not a competition. It's not, oh, I did that the other day. You guys are a team. And I think competition breeds resentment, and that's a huge problem in relationships.
That's an interesting perspective that you have. And I think for a man, it's easy for us to have, you can say, extreme ownership, like Jocko Willink, like leadership, like take extreme ownership. It's easy for us to do that, like say in the business world, for example. Like if something goes wrong with my company, if one of my employees does something with a customer and makes a mistake, like me as the leader of the company, as the owner of the company, can say, look, ultimately it's my responsibility, right? Like it all falls back on me. But a switch turns off when we get home, and it's like, there are dishes in the sink, or the kid's diaper needs to be changed. Well, that's my wife's responsibility. I'm not going to stoop down to that level to take on that task. Well, it's like, and I like that perspective that you just gave. It's like, no. If you're the true leader of the household, then it's all your responsibility, right?
Yep.
And this reminds me of something that I saw even within our own Catholic space. It was a tweet that was shared by another Catholic influencer. I'm not going to name names, but basically it was like, if a man is changing the diaper in the household, like feminism has invaded. Like, that's a feminine thing for a man to do, to have to change a kid's diaper. Yeah. And you know, when it comes to leadership, like the best leaders, like I use the example of military leaders, like the best military leaders are willing to go and fight on the front lines. Like, what made George Washington so respected and revered by his men is that he was willing to ride in the battle first. Like, the best leaders are willing to get their hands dirty and make the lives and the tasks and the operations of, like, even the lowest, like from a military perspective, even the lowest soldier on the front line, like he's there with them in the trenches. And when it comes to changing a diaper and getting your hands dirty, like literally, or doing the dishes, like, I think we as men, we have to look at it that way. If we're looking at ourselves, like, take on the extreme ownership and be the true leader of your household. So yeah, I appreciate that perspective that you shared.
Of course. I mean, it's called leadership, not commandership. I mean, you're leading your family. You are the head. I mean, you look at a pack of wolves, the head leads, the others fall behind. So when you think of leadership, you're not on a podium telling people what to do. You are there in like you said, like basically in the ditches with them. You're there to be morale, to support, to help. And that's
there's a word. It's serve.
Yes,
and
serve.
So that's where I say lead and serve. If you're talking about true leadership, like even Christ says it. If you want to be the greatest, like the greatest among you is the servant of all. And like that's what he was. And that's the paradox of Christ. Like the best and the highest thing that you can do is to give up your life. It's like, you know what I mean? So it's like you can't have, I know, like the whole faith and works from a Catholic and Protestant point of view. It's like faith and works. It's like faith works. It's like it's a one thing. It's a marriage of those two things. Like one can't exist without the other. And from a leadership perspective, like lead, serve, like it's the same type of marriage. There is no leadership unless you're willing to get down and get your hands dirty and serve the people that you're leading. We have so many people that just, you know, this drives me crazy with politicians. They just sit there and they talk, and they don't actually do any serving. They don't do anything to build up
They're not
the people
in the
that they so-called lead, right?
Yep.
And this is why most people can't stand politicians, because they're not real leaders.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. They kind of just command, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, they expect other people, littler people beneath them to fulfill what they say they're going to do.
Yeah.
And it's just like, but then you're not actually doing it. Huh?
Yeah.
Huh? But yeah, and I think, you know, especially being a leader, I mean,
well, if you're a father and you're just barking orders at your kids all the time, they're not going to respect you.
No,
they're not
going to
respect
be there
you.
with them. Well, they're also, here's another issue. The kids won't respect the mom. I've seen this so many times. The dad won't do the dishes. The dad, you know, bullies the mom in some ways, kind of thing. And then the kids start doing the exact same thing because the dad is the leader. So no matter if the dad acts like a dad or not, in the sense of like being a bumbling idiot or being an actual masculine leader, if he does not respect his wife, his kids won't. And they pick up on that. Kids are smart. You know, you have 5 kids. Like, they're very smart. They pick up on little things that change, tone of voice, body language. Kids are very in tune with, you know, their parents and the dynamic between their parents. If they're stressed, if they're tense, if they're happy, if they're sad, and it affects the children. And so when I've seen this so many times. I mean, it happens online as well, you know, and like, you know, TV and stuff, they kind of push that a little bit too. But it makes it for the woman to basically be the enemy in her own home. And it's like she's doing all this work. She's doing all the laundry and making sure that the home runs smoothly. She's getting bullied for it, not just by her husband, but now by her kids.
Yeah, she becomes the doormat of the entire family.
And I've seen that so many times.
Yeah, you as the man, that's a really good perspective to keep. You're leading your kids one way or the other. Like you're always leading them. It's just a matter of which path are you leading them down. It's really important that you say that. My wife has actually said to me, like, you know, especially as our kids get older, my oldest is going to be 11 this year, but we've had to have conversations. It's like he will mimic like I will treat her in some way, and I'm not perfect, so I'll fail,
Yeah.
but he will mimic that, like, and he'll start to like say things to my wife where it's like, it may be something where maybe, I don't know, a situation arises where, I don't know, I don't want to say like I prove her wrong or win an argument or something like that, but like in any case, big or small, he will see it, and then he will then
Yeah.
mimic, and he'll treat his younger brothers and sisters in a certain way. He'll come back and he'll talk to my wife in a certain way. Like, if my wife and I'll conflict,
Yeah.
we're both very opinionated. We're both
That's
very disagreeable, like high disagreeable on the personality scale. So we can go at it a little bit. One of the things I do want to say, one of the things from a marriage standpoint that I've learned, I think maybe Jordan Peterson says this, it's not a matter of if a husband and wife conflict in front of their kids. What's most, like, you don't want to shield your kids from every conflict that you have, because that's not real life. The most important thing that you can do is resolve the conflict as quickly as possible in front of them, so they can actually see, like, hey, mom and dad they have a disagreement right now, but if you can reach a point of resolution and resolve the conflict, that is like one of the most important things you can do to build up a kid, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting to say. So I don't have to feel bad by saying that my wife and I conflict, right?
Oh,
But
no.
like,
I think it's important for couples to kind of, clash heads every now and then.
well, it's
Not
part
like,
of communication.
Yeah,
right? Like,
exactly.
you're
And-
not going to agree on everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And people who think they do, it's just like, that's not reality,
Right.
sweetie. Like, that's not it.
Right. But it's important for me to say, and what I was getting at is like, maybe, my tone wasn't, maybe I failed on my tone, or maybe I've raised my voice, but my sons, they'll see that, and then they'll take that to their relationship. So I think that point holds for sure. So
Yeah.
I have the responsibility to be like, hey, look,
Isn't that crazy?
I did not handle myself that well in that situation. Like, this is not how we treat people, blah, blah, blah. But like, yeah, they will take it, and they'll see what I do, and they will run with it for
Kids
sure.
are observant.
Yeah, they really are.
I've babysat for over 12 years. Oh my gosh. The amount of things that I've just been like, did you get that from me? Have I taught you that? I'm like, I don't think I taught you that.
Yeah.
Like, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they go to public school, so they could have picked it up somewhere else. But you know what
Yeah.
I mean? It's like, you
Yeah.
kind of question it. It's like, you got to be careful around kids sometimes, I mean, not careful as in like shielding them, like you're saying, but with how you portray relationships and stuff like that. And like you said, the conflict resolve. There's always, people are really good at conflict, not resolution. And the resolution is really where the healing takes place.
Yeah.
Because you can do wrong. We're all going to do wrong. But how do you handle it afterwards? Do you hunker down on it, be more narcissistic, and like really like drive in the nail and prove your point? Or do you take a more humble approach, and you're just like, I was wrong. I shouldn't have said this, and I'm sorry. I mean, I feel like people are always like, oh, it's so hard to say sorry, and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, I mean, maybe in the moment when you're really heated, but if you guys can take just a couple minutes to just kind of like think about it, not just respond to each other and like talk at each other, but genuinely just like think about what each other have said, and then just be like, okay, maybe we can settle this in a less heated way. I mean, yeah, I think, kids are just so smart, and the way their parents treat each other really does kind of communicate how they're going to be in other relationships, like you said. Yeah.
Well, I think that's one of my arguments as far as like what it means to be Christian. What it means to be Christian is not somebody who doesn't sin and doesn't make mistakes. It's that individual who, after they sin and make mistakes, because we all will, is willing to go to confession, right? Is willing to humble themselves, to admit that they were wrong, and then to resolve. Like, we make the act of contrition and confession every single time we go, and it's like I resolve to sin no more, right? And it's like we're making that commitment to admit that we sinned and learn from it and resolve and sin. And like that right there, I would say that right there is what makes you a Christian.
Yes.
You're failing to be a Christian, to act like a Christian, if you just go into yourself, never admit that you're wrong, and harden yourself off, right? Like, that's where, I mean, that's ultimately what Judas did. Like, Judas, like, again, like you see the disciples are great examples. Every disciple except for John fled. Peter denied Christ 3 times, but they admitted they were wrong. They humbled themselves, and they eventually ended up dying for Christ. Like, they eventually,
In very
got
morbid
where
ways.
they needed to be. Right, exactly, in bad ways. Judas is the one that he sinned. He made the mistake, but then he hardened himself and gave up hope
Yes.
and refused to repent, which
And that's
it's like a universal life lesson.
Well, it's true, because I truly believe that Judas could have been an amazing saint. I truly believe if he would have turned around, repented of his sin, and instead, well, he, killed himself.
Right.
And if he could have been an amazing saint.
Right.
I mean, just think of the possibilities of that. And how many times do we choose the path of Judas over the path of Christ?
Yeah.
It's scary.
Yeah, Christ could have forgiven Judas in an amazing way.
Yeah.
And he could have been a saint. Yeah.
He could have been
after
at the
the
foot
fact,
of the cross.
after
Yes.
he betrayed him. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's because Christ always knew it was coming. But I think at the same time, he still prayed that Judas would,
Repent after the
Yeah.
fact, maybe. Yeah. Not give up hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that's what despair can do. And that's why, you need to cultivate joy in your life in a lot of ways, even when things aren't necessarily happy, but still having a Christ-like joy is very important. And, otherwise you run the risk of becoming a Judas. And it's crazy to think about, but it's so true.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good perspective to have, that every single one of us has the opportunity to be a Judas if we're not careful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot. I really like a lot of his stuff, but that's what he said. You go back in history and you read all these evil people, and you're always the one that would do the right thing, right?
Yep.
Like, you're never the person that would turn over Anne Frank.
Yeah.
You're the person that will always do right. Like, that's what all of us love to believe. But it's like,
You never know.
you are naive unless you've arrived at the fact that, no, you have within you the potential to be the Hitler or the Judas, or, the person who turns in your neighbor for hiding Anne Frank, right? Like, you have to come to terms with the fact that is within you.
Yeah. That's scary.
It is scary.
I mean,
it
it's
really
so
is.
crazy because you don't think you're capable of that. But when faced with extraordinary means, especially, you think of Anne Frank and the situation they were under. But then you also think about St. Maximilian Kolbe, in the concentration camp. Would you have the strength, not just physically, but spiritually, to step in place of a prisoner and take his death sentence? Would you? Because, would you die for Christ? And I'm not just talking about physically dying, but spiritually dying for Christ. Are you fasting? Are you giving up things that are bad for you? Are you watching proper TV shows and movies, or are you poisoning your mind and poisoning your soul? Because what we do with our body affects our soul. What we do with our soul affects our body. You sin with your body, you're in mortal sin, depending on the sin, of course. You go to confession, you're forgiven of that. And your body is all of a sudden, cleansed of that, and your soul is cleansed of that. And it shows through. I cannot tell you how many women have gone into confession and come out like looking completely different. Just the amount of weight that mortal sin can have on a soul and how that translates to look on the body is insane. But the light that comes from women after coming, men too, of course, but I've gone with girlfriends to confession and stuff like that. And the light that just comes off of them, it's beautiful. It's not just an exterior beauty, it's internal beauty. And we need more of that. And I think it's really important that we never give in to despair and know that confession is always available, and that it's not a place of, condemning or anything. Priests have heard this a million times. They're not going to condemn you. And I know people have given me horror stories of when they went to a priest and they told them something and now they're afraid of confession or whatever. And I'm like, you just got to suck it up. I know that sounds like, they're just like, oh, what? I can't suck it up. I'm like, you're going to have to suck it up because this is how virtue is cultivated. You have to forgive the priest. You have to get over it. And you have to keep going back to confession. Maybe not with that priest, of course. But you can't abandon the sacraments because you have a bad experience with a person. It doesn't even have to be a priest. I know people who have left the church for less. But yeah, I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah, it does. And what that reminds me of, we truly, even as Catholics, we fall into this. It's something I'm constantly trying to remind myself of, but we truly underestimate the power of the sacraments. And let me give you an example. My brother brought this to my attention. This changed my mind on, changed my perspective on the sacraments in general. But we were having a debate and an argument about infant baptism and whether that's, beneficial for Catholics or Christians. Catholics and Christians. But I was on the side that said like, no, I think people would be more committed if they weren't baptized as infants and they chose like out of a conversion of heart to be baptized when they were, that would give us more Catholics or Christians who are on fire for their belief, right? Because they're making that conscious decision. And then my brother was like, I don't know. He was like, because his wife was baptized as an infant, baptized early, and but her family never really practiced the faith. So she was baptized as a Christian, but didn't really participate in the religious practice for really her entire life. And my brother was like, I think that we underestimate the power and the grace that we receive at baptism. And he was like, I actually truly believe this, that that my wife met me because of the graces that she received at baptism.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that was really interesting. It's almost like that grace that she received when she was really young, like it was almost like it was a protection that allowed her to like go about in her life, but like it remained there and then allowed her to marry someone who was a devout Catholic. And now she has come into the church and like her life has been completely changed. And her life is, you know, now and they go to church every Sunday, they practice the sacraments, etc. So my brother used that and I was like, oh man, it's like I really like that. But when you think of it from the perspective of, so now I've taken that and I've been like, okay, the magic, or I'll use the power of baptism, but then think about also, like you just mentioned, almost like the power of confession, where it's like you see these women, they come out and they like look better physically. And if you've been to confession, you've made a good confession where you truly admit that you were wrong and you're forgiven from it. Like when the priest gives you absolution, standing in the place of Christ that the priest is standing in, when he gives you absolution, like sometimes you can even feel like a wash like come over you, and you literally come out of the confessional feeling like it's hard to explain, but you come out feeling like lighter and like freer. It truly is a real experience. And then you also have, you know, the tendency that you had towards sin actually decreases. Like something does change in you. I don't know exactly what it is. Like we need to have somebody go in and physiologically measure people coming out of confession. But, and then this is the last thing that I'll say about this, is like the Eucharist as well. Like if you are someone who is receiving the Eucharist every single day, and I would say like this is something that it's like I have a weekly goal. The weekly goal, it's like one of my weekly goals and priorities is to receive the Eucharist every week. And I have to be in a state of grace to do that. I have to align my life throughout the week in a way where I'm avoiding sin. And if I fail, then I need to get to confession in order for me to receive that. But when you think about that practically, it's like, how do I have to live throughout the week? And I have to live in a way that makes me worthy of receiving the Eucharist. And that, I'm sure, bears fruit in all aspects of my life, whether it be professionally with my family, in our marriage, etc. But it's like also too, I'm receiving the Eucharist. I'm receiving the body and blood of Jesus. And I think we're not just going and receiving a wafer in our mouths every week. It's like, no, we're receiving something that we don't even understand the power of. And I'm sure that's a power and a fuel that also keeps me doing the things that I need to do on a daily and weekly basis in order to have a successful marriage and be a, you know, good leader and husband and father and all of those things. So it's all that to say, like, these sacraments are not just like religious routines. They are something that truly power us in our lives to help us remain in that bubble that I was talking about, but on the path to remain saints.
Yeah, I mean, confession is just so powerful. They're actually, in a lot of cases, confession is more powerful than an exorcism, because what you're doing is you yourself are going to the sacrament of mercy. You are choosing to humble yourself and to make amends with God. Usually exorcisms are a last resort for people where they're just like, I'm possessed, or I have this, or I have that. And most exorcisms actually, well, I guess I shouldn't say most, but a lot of exorcisms are not on Catholics. They're actually usually on Protestants, atheists, people who aren't a part of the church, because the sacraments offer us spiritual protection as well. And so confession is sometimes more powerful than an exorcism because you are choosing to reject Satan and to accept Christ, and you are making amends with Christ. And that's why it's so powerful. And then when I was struggling with my pornography addiction, I just couldn't kick it. There was a problem and I didn't know what it was. And I had shame about it. But I had no idea how I was supposed to actually get over it. I did covenant eyes, I did a bunch of stuff, and they're phenomenal. But there was still like something that was just keeping me from that. And one thing that changed everything was doing face-to-face confessions. I was looking the priest in the eye, in persona Christi, in the person of Christ, telling him the sins that nailed Christ to the cross. And being able to look someone in the eyes and say that and feel the guilt. And the guilt, that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to feel shame or to feel guilt. I feel like people are like, oh, shame, voodoo, whatever, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not a bad thing. It means your conscience is working. It means your conscience is good. And people but the issue is that people become kind of prideful and they ruminate in the guilt as opposed to accepting it, being like, I did wrong, but I'm going to do better. They kind of like ruminate in it. It becomes more like scrupulosity. But having a face-to-face confession and being able to look the priest in the eyes and tell him the sins that I have committed, that gave me so much motivation to completely cut it out of my life. And I've obviously never gone back to it since, but that is the one thing that changed everything. I was horrified. I hated doing it, but that's how virtue's cultivated. We have to do things we're afraid of. And for me, the face-to-face confession was a last resort because I was like, this priest knows me very well, might I add. And I would have to, every time I messed up, I'd have to go and tell him every single time and look him in the eyes. And obviously he had no judgment or anything. He gave me absolution every time and was always very sweet. But it gave me the motivation because I was like, I need to do better. Like I can't, like these are the sins that nailed Jesus to the cross. I need to do better.
Yeah, it's like the highest form of accountability that you were experiencing there too. Like if you're committed to your faith and if you're committed to God, like if that's the highest priority and you have to go week after week to confess the same sin, eventually it comes down to, all right, you have to keep doing it. So you have to keep going week after week, or what? Or you give up completely. But like if you, that's the thing, like how important is God in your life? If you think, that's the difference between choosing moving along the path towards heaven or moving along the path towards hell. Like that's ultimately the choice that you're making right there. It's like, I'm either going to commit to this and I'm going to continue to try to do this again and again for God, and I'm going to look stupid here in the confessional week after week, or what? You're going to give up, and then what are the consequences of giving up?
You become a Judas.
Yeah.
That's what
the worst of the worst consequences.
Exactly. And with confession, you get sanctifying grace, and with sanctifying grace, let's say like you went to confession, so you have you're in a state of grace. And let's say you commit a mortal sin, so your sanctifying grace goes down here. When you go to confession again and you are in a state of grace, your sanctifying grace, it doesn't go back to here. It actually goes higher because it gives you extra sanctifying grace to be able to overcome those vices and those sins. Yeah. God already took all of this into account when he created you. He's taking, obviously you have free will, but he took all this into account when he created man, in the sense in the New Testament and everything, where it's like he realized like, yes, we need confession. We need to be able to have that forgiveness. And we also need that grace to not just like fall back into the same sin. We make an act of contrition. We say we're sorry and we're not going to try and fall into that sin again. We need to take that seriously. Again, going back to words have meaning. We need to take that seriously.
Yeah. Like, again, words have meaning. And what we're talking about here, and this is just so important for people to know, because I think this goes back and kind of, loops in what we were talking about in the beginning of like people losing trust for the church. And it's like, I understand all of those things, but what it comes down to is that, no, there's actually like real power in our faith and the things that we're talking about, right? Like it's not just a change in our Sunday routine or just like religious practices that we kind of, do to go through the motions. Like these are things that properly heal us. They keep us stable and safe in this world, and they orient us properly. Like they orient like our minds and our souls and our bodies properly to help us overcome the habits and the sins that we struggle with. And it's the best armor and defense against the things of this world that are trying to destroy our minds, bodies, and souls. And I think that we need, like, it's real. It's not something that we're saying or make believe. We're not trying to get, your butt in the pew, for example. It's like, no. Like these are, like, if you're struggling, like this is something that is going to be of highest and best use as far as help goes.
Exactly.
For you. I think that's the advantage that the church has in our modern day.
Oh, yeah. And I think the most important way we can communicate that is living it out in our own lives.
Yeah.
You can talk at someone as much as you want, but if they don't see Christ in you, they're going to be like, okay, so then why haven't you done this?
Yeah.
Or why haven't... And it's important that we not just communicate these things, but we also embody them, living out the gospel, for sure.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
just crazy.
we've gone for a little over almost 2 hours now.
Ooh la la, Matt Frad podcast type thing.
Yeah.
I've done this before. It's fine.
Have you been on Matt Frad?
Yeah.
Pints with Aquinas? Nice.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a great podcast.
That was fun.
Well, he can go for like 2-3 hours, right?
He's
goes a
gone.
little long.
My
Yeah.
friend Seamus from Freedom Tunes.
Yeah.
They did like a 5-hour long.
Oh, really?
I was like, Seamus, I can't believe you did that.
That's long. That's long. I had Dr. John Bergsma on here. I think he did almost like a 4-hour one with
Oh wow,
Matt Frad.
that's
Yeah.
awesome. We
I only had him for 2 hours.
Okay, well
Yeah.
that's good. I mean, there's limits, I guess.
Yeah.
But I mean, people
Yeah.
listen to our episode, and I think it's 2.5 hours long.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's not horrible, but or maybe
No,
it's
I've listened to
3.5.
plenty that are long.
Especially when you're driving, you
Yeah,
just kind of like
it's-
pause and
it's-
restart. It's
And
like
it's
an
good to learn.
audiobook.
And it's good to learn. Like
Yeah.
it's a great form of learning to hear people talk in long
Exactly.
form.
And conversational too, because I feel like it sticks with you more because you're like a part of the conversation in a way.
Yeah.
And our brains retain more information when we're like, talking, as opposed to just be like, chapter 1.
Yeah.
This is how you
100%.
become Catholic.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
Yeah. Well, I hope that what people get from this is just, I mean, like honestly, maybe two young people, I would say, with somewhat similar backgrounds that, again, were cradle Catholics that, maybe fell away a little bit and went through periods where, we had doubt and questions and eventually came back and I think we really touched on why, both of us came back and what really cemented our faith and kind of, we talked a lot about like the power of what your faith can do for you actually like in your real life, right?
Yes.
And what aligning your life toward God can actually do for you. It has real effects. It's not just it's not just make believe.
Yeah, I really do hope that people kind of realize this. And the thing is that I'm all for like a little bit of tough love, like a little kick in the butt to realize like, hey, yeah, maybe I do need to step up, especially for the guys or for the women, whatever. It's just like a little kick in the keister, to be like, hey, maybe I need to start taking this seriously. Yeah.
Well, I think what's important to say, and this one of the last things I'll say is like St. Ignatius of Loyola and the discernment of spirits. If you're living a life in sin, that guilt and that nagging that you feel, like that emptiness that you feel, is actually God working in your life trying to pull you back. Yeah, it's like when you resolve to live a life free from sin, it's actually the enemy that's the one that they change roles, which is really interesting. But the enemy, when you're living a life in sin, he'll try to keep encouraging you and make you feel justified and justify your excuses and make you feel comfortable and lead you down like, no, I should be doing this. It's okay. Right. But it's actually God that's the one that's kind of, nagging at you, making you feel a little guilty. And again, that's not a bad thing, right?
No.
He's trying to get you back on the path.
And I think that's, I mean, again, they say Catholic guilt. I'm like, guilt's not a bad thing. It's a good thing if you know how to use it right.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. You never want it. You never want that guilt to lead you to the point of despair, like we talked about. But
that's why we have confession.
Exactly. But that guilt to get you back on the path is a very good thing. I mean, we have that in all. That's okay to have in every other aspect of our life, right? It's like, just think about it in school. If you're not doing the things that you need to do to get an A on the test, like you feel that within you. You're like, oh, I know I should be studying, but I'm not doing it. So you feel like that guilt and like that nag within you. It's okay there, but it's not okay when it comes to your overall life.
Yeah. When it becomes religion, they're like, oh, religious guilt and stuff. And they use it as like weaponry or something. It's like, no, it's not.
It's just reality.
Yeah,
it's fundamental reality is what it is.
And how God made us is to have those emotions for a reason.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's just crazy. But yeah.
Well, tell people where they can find you.
Yes. So if you want to find me, you can find me at thereligioushippie.com. All of my social media, I'm on everything except TikTok, as we established earlier. They banned me, whatever. I'm not butthurt. Totally. And you can find me on Twitter, or X, I guess now, Instagram. I have a podcast called A Catholic's Perspective. And I think that's about it.
Great.
Yeah.
One last question. Why the religious hippie?
Yes. So people ask me all the time. So it was actually a nickname when I was growing up, because I was always wearing like the craziest outfits, I was barefoot all the time. My hair was like a rat's. It was crazy. And so my friends called me hippie as a nickname. And then when I reverted, they're like, oh, so you're like the religious hippie now. And I was just like, yeah, okay. And I think the main thing is that hippie used to be a countercultural thing back in the 60s. But now the counterculture is actually traditionalism and things like that. So I'm countercultural as a hippie.
Yeah.
And because the name doesn't have Catholic in it, it draws in people from all different types of religions and backgrounds because they're curious. They're like, oh, the religious hippie, what's that? And when they find out, they just automatically start learning about Catholicism. They're like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah.
And so I kind of trick them there. But
It's a disguise.
Yeah. It works very well,
Yeah.
I must say. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Amber, thank you. I really
you so
enjoyed this
much.
conversation. It was great talking to you.
Yeah,
today.
I really appreciate you having me on. It was a really fun time.
Great.